April 26, 1986, a day that forever scarred the face of nuclear energy. In the heart of the Soviet Union, nestled among the marshes and forests of northern Ukraine, stood the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. A symbol of Soviet engineering prowess, it held 4 RBMK nuclear reactors, each capable of producing 1,000 megawatts of electricity. But on that fateful spring day, Reactor 4 was to become infamous. A routine safety test was scheduled for Reactor 4. The intention was to determine how the reactor would behave if it lost power. Ironically, this test designed to ensure safety would instead trigger one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. As the night shift took over operations, the test began. A series of technical glitches and delays, however, resulted in a dangerously unstable reactor. The power level plummeted, then surged uncontrollably. The reactor was on the brink of disaster, but the gravity of the situation was grossly underestimated. In the early hours of the morning, an engineer pressed the emergency shutdown button. It was a last-ditch effort to avert a crisis, but it was tragically too late. The reactor's design flaws, combined with the unstable conditions, resulted in a violent power surge. The reactor's fuel rods fractured, causing a massive steam explosion that blew the 1,000-ton lid off Reactor 4. The explosion was followed by a lethal rain of radioactive particles that blanketed the surrounding area and poisoned the night sky. The once humming heart of Soviet nuclear energy was now a silent, glowing tomb. The world outside was still oblivious to the terror that had just unfolded. The Soviet authorities scrambled to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster. Those in nearby towns and villages, unaware of the invisible killer in the air, went about their lives. Little did anyone know this was just the beginning of a catastrophe that would echo through time. As the radioactive fallout began to spread, the world remained oblivious. The Chernobyl disaster had occurred, but the silence was deafening. An eerie calm masked the chaos that was about to unravel. This was a catastrophe not of fire and brimstone, but of invisible particles and silent death. In the immediate aftermath of the explosion, the reactor's core was a molten mess of radioactive material. This deadly concoction was spewed into the atmosphere, carried by winds across Europe. From the tranquil fields of Scandinavia to the bustling streets of Western Europe, no corner was spared. Yet, the world outside the Iron Curtain was none the wiser. In the early hours of this disaster, the men and women of Pripyat, the city closest to Chernobyl, went about their lives as if it were a day like any other. Children played in the parks, mothers prepared meals, and fathers went to work. The Soviet authorities, in a chilling display of disregard for human life, delayed the evacuation. Time was of the essence, but it seemed to stand still. 48 hours passed before the first orders for evacuation were issued. An entire city was uprooted in a matter of hours, leaving behind a ghost town that echoed with the laughter and tears of its former inhabitants. As the days turned into weeks, the radioactive material continued its silent march across Europe. It was only when a nuclear power plant in Sweden detected high levels of radiation that the world began to wake up to the disaster. Scientists, peering at their instruments in disbelief, traced the source back to Chernobyl. And then, the world held its breath. The Iron Curtain was lifted, if only for a moment, revealing a scene of devastation and despair. The echoes of the disaster were heard loud and clear across the globe. In the face of an invisible enemy, the true scale of the disaster began to emerge. The Chernobyl disaster had begun its reign of terror, and the world would never be the same again. With the world watching, a desperate race against time ensued. In the wake of Chernobyl's reactor number 4 meltdown, the Soviet Union marshaled all its resources to contain the disaster. The most notable of these efforts was the construction of an enormous containment structure known as the sarcophagus. This colossal edifice was not just a symbol of human ingenuity, but also a testament to our capacity for courage in the face of disaster. The sarcophagus was a monumental task, requiring the collective efforts of hundreds of thousands of people. Its purpose was simple yet daunting: to encase the radioactive core and halt the spread of deadly isotopes into the atmosphere. Toiling day and night, engineers and workers defied the ticking clock, exposing themselves to perilous levels of radiation. Parallel to this grand project, another group of heroes emerged: the Liquidators. These brave individuals, often drawn from the military and firefighting services, were tasked with the grim and perilous job of cleaning up the radioactive debris. They ventured into the heart of the disaster zone, armed with little more than rudimentary protective gear and a sense of duty. Their actions, while heroic, came at a great personal cost, with many suffering severe health effects as a result of their exposure. The first responders too bore the brunt of the disaster. Firefighters, police officers, and medics rushed to the scene, unaware of the invisible enemy they were facing. The health effects they experienced in the aftermath were a stark reminder of the insidious nature of radiation. Many developed acute radiation sickness while others faced a lifetime of related health problems. These valiant efforts, however, did not come without a price. The human cost of Chernobyl is still being counted, with the long-term health effects continuing to emerge. The sarcophagus, the liquidators, and the first responders, they all serve as a sobering reminder of the battle against time that was fought in the wake of the world's worst nuclear disaster. In the aftermath of the disaster, the world was left to count the cost. Today, the ghost of Chernobyl continues to haunt us. The long-term effects of the disaster are as chilling as the event itself. It's like a shadow that refuses to fade, a specter that has imprinted itself on the very fabric of our being. Let's start with the health effects on the local population. In the wake of the event, countless individuals were exposed to high levels of radiation, leading to an increased risk of cancer. Thousands of lives were changed forever. Children diagnosed with thyroid cancer, adults battling leukemia. The World Health Organization estimates that about 4,000 deaths can be directly attributed to the disaster, with many more indirectly affected. The environmental impact too is hard to ignore. The surrounding area was bathed in radiation, poisoning the land and making it uninhabitable for humans. Forests turned red, the color of rust, a stark visual reminder of the disaster. Animals were left to reclaim the land, but even they are not immune to the effects of radiation. Mutations and health problems have been reported in the local wildlife, a silent testament to the lingering impact of the disaster. Perhaps one of the most eerie reminders of the disaster is the creation of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. A vast area of over 2,000 square kilometers, it's a ghost town, a time capsule of life in the Soviet Union in the mid-80s. Walking through it, one can't help but feel the weight of the tragedy, the palpable silence, a constant reminder of the lives lost and the lives forever changed. But it's not just a place of sorrow and loss, it's a place of scientific study, a unique opportunity to understand the long-term effects of such a disaster. It's a place of resilience, a testament to the power of nature to reclaim and survive. The legacy of Chernobyl, a stark reminder of the power and danger of nuclear energy, continues to echo in our world. It's a shadow that lingers, a lesson that we must never forget. The ghost of Chernobyl continues to haunt us, a chilling reminder of the past, and a warning for the future. As we look back on the Chernobyl disaster, the lessons it taught us remain ever relevant. It was a wake-up call that echoed around the globe, shaking us from our complacency and forcing us to confront the reality of nuclear power, both its potential and its peril. In the aftermath of Chernobyl, the world took a hard look at nuclear safety regulations. The disaster underscored the need for rigorous procedures, stringent oversight, and comprehensive emergency planning. In response, safety standards were significantly tightened across the globe. Nuclear power plants were re-evaluated, their designs scrutinized, their safety systems overhauled. The focus shifted from mere accident prevention to a more holistic approach that also encompassed accident management and mitigation. Yet, the lessons of Chernobyl extend beyond the realm of nuclear safety. The disaster also spurred a surge of research into the effects of radiation on human health and the environment. We've since gained a deeper understanding of the long-term impacts of radiation exposure, from an increased risk of certain cancers to potential genetic damage. This knowledge has informed public health strategies, from radiation therapy guidelines to emergency response protocols in the event of a nuclear incident. Moreover, Chernobyl has taught us about the resilience of nature. Despite the devastation, life in the exclusion zone has adapted and endured in ways that continue to surprise and inspire scientists. This has opened up new avenues of research into environmental recovery and resilience, shedding light on how ecosystems respond to and recover from severe disturbances. However, perhaps the most enduring lesson of Chernobyl is the importance of transparency and accountability. The initial secrecy surrounding the disaster only compounded its effects, and it's a stark reminder that in the face of such grave risks, openness and honesty are not just virtues but necessities. In the face of disaster, we were forced to learn. Now, we must ensure that the lessons of Chernobyl are never forgotten.